All right, hello, welcome back to another Ethan's Excited. This one is gonna come sometime after most of the episodes that we've recorded so far, both myself and Garen. And tonight, Ethan is agitated. I think Ethan's been agitated before, but tonight, well, you know what? I won't say agitated. Tonight, Ethan is on a soapbox. And I say that because I get on kind of my soapbox whenever I talk about teachers and students and how they should interact. I'm very passionate about that. I am a teacher myself, and I have great care and concern for how my behavior and my attitudes and my activities affect the students whose lives I am blessed to be a part of. And I've always said, even before I knew what I wanted to teach, I used to want to teach martial arts, but it didn't matter what it was I actually chose to teach or what I wanted to teach. But I always knew that whatever my chosen subject, that I was going to be teaching more than just whatever that subject was as a teacher. That's a very convoluted way of saying that a lot of teachers, in my experience, often fall into the rut of thinking that they're just the math teacher, they're just the science teacher, they're just the English teacher, and that one's the best because that's me. Just saying. Newsflash, you need reading and everything. So, English is important. But anyway, they think that they only teach their chosen subject. And other than that, then they think they're not really qualified to teach, or they simply refuse to try to teach anything else. Now, I kind of get that. Like, I had to teach a career search class once, and having little to no actual life experience searching around for careers or having to have to deal with that sort of thing. I've always known what I wanted to do. I've always kind of been on that path. I've always known what that path looked like, and I'm not one of those people who's quite qualified to teach a career search class. The days practically consisted of me saying, hey, life's hard, don't screw it up, get a job and be productive, and shut up and sit down and stop talking. Like, that's my career search class. Get a job, don't be a lazy bum. But that attitude, I think, in just general, is a problem involved for someone in the education of a child or a young adult. Unless you have a student who's, mostly homeschooled like I was, or, the student has parents that are actively shaping his or her values from a very young age, which is not the norm in America these days. It thankfully is at the Christian school I teach at typically, but it is not the norm in America. And so unless you have that, then the students are going to be taking in the culture of the school around them. And they're going to be shaping their values after their experiences instead of their experiences being shaped by their values. I was blessed enough to have parents that did that for me, but a lot of students are not that blessed. I think I think of this sort of thing from a teacher perspective, which means that I see the students as a whole rather than individually. I'm getting much better at that. Like, even just in my, this is my second year in this full time, and I'm getting much better at that already, seeing them individually. And even though seeing them as a whole sometimes is a good thing because it helps us tailor our instruction, we have to go from the big picture view down to the individual differentiation. And now with this particular subject, what I think we have to do is the opposite. I think we have to start from the individual view. We have to yes, there's a place for focusing on the students as a whole, but we must make sure we are thinking individualistically when it comes to this particular situation. Think about a student who comes to school typically sees between 5 and 7 teachers a day. And I'm talking about like high school, junior high, that sort of thing. Each teacher gets a period of time to influence their students in their classroom. So a lot of teachers forget that while they're busy communicating their subject explicitly and verbally, they are also communicating their character implicitly and often non-verbally. And this can be anything from how they address the whole class during the opening of the period to the way they look at students or respond out loud when a student raises his or her hand with a question or a comment, regardless of whether or not it's a good question or a good comment. If a student raises their hand and you respond with a warm, welcoming demeanor or countenance, and you have a desire to answer as best you can, then that student learns from you that even in that small way, how answering somebody else should be done. They learn what a grown-up adult answer looks like. Now, on the other side, answering that student with frustration, with a sigh, or like snapping at them, teaches them that as an adult, children are just an annoyance that they have to deal with, and there's a paycheck involved, and that's why they're there. Which I confess I have said to students, don't worry, I get paid whether or not you pass this test. Now, that's different because I built a rapport with them in the classroom before we ever get there. And I don't necessarily mean that every time I say it. However, I have been in classrooms where like this is a teacher means this when they say it. They really literally don't care because they're getting paid regardless. And those are the kinds of things that you as a teacher embed in your students without, even making a conscious effort to do it most of the time. So now you multiply this by how many times this happens during a single class per student, how many times every class each student per day has, and you start to realize the scope of how much of an influence teachers have with their students. And I think a good teacher is going to know this and is going to take advantage of it. So teachers, if you're a teacher and you're listening to this, or you want to be a teacher and you listen to this, ask yourself, why do kids need to be in school? Let's start there. Let's start with something basic. So obviously, the correct answer has something to do with preparing them for life in the real world and giving them the tools they need to succeed, right? Basic stuff. Now, if you're an observant human being, if you're not, why are you even listening to this podcast? But if you are, you realize that English, math, science, history, athletics, all that stuff, they're not the sum of human existence on this earth. In order to function in society, I'm not even talking from just a Christian perspective. This can be seen from a secular perspective too. In order to function in our society, those things are necessary: English, math, history, science, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to prosper, not just function, but prosper and succeed in society, you need something more than just that. You need something called character. Good teachers, whatever their chosen subject is, have to be aware that they are teaching character to their students. If they're doing this explicitly, intentionally, they're likely going to do it well. If they don't want to admit that they have anything to do with shaping their kids' character, then they're still shaping it implicitly, unintentionally, and it's probably not having a very positive impact because they're ignoring something that can't be ignored. And that, my friends, I think is a waste of a teaching position. At that point, you need to retire. You don't belong in education. Sorry, that's just how it is. You can have the best English or math or whatever knowledge, but if you lack the character and the discernment and the wisdom to use those things, it's going to be completely useless to you, no matter who you are or what station of life you're in. Now, of course, this is where, to the secular person, we come to the hard questions because they may agree with me, but like all of my college cohorts agreed with me when I said this. But then they might also ask, well, then what exactly is character? Where does it come from? How do I teach it explicitly? And when I asked my college classmates, my secular classmates, those questions, I didn't get very consistent answers. And if they were consistent, they weren't very specific. Because if you want to know where values and character come from, you have to start asking life's big, hard questions. The ones about God, why we're here, and how we're here as human beings on this earth. Any serious discussion about values and ethics will lead here by nature because of the connections between values and absolutes, and the connection between absolutes and a transcendent creator, and hence between all values and God. Obviously, because I am a Christian, a faithfully practicing one that believes in God, I know exactly how I want to teach my students about values and character. The secular teachers have a harder time with this. It simply is going to be true for them, that they're going to have a more difficult time with this, because that's how this goes. Now, before the separation of church and state wackos get all riled up, I'm not going to be preaching from the Bible to students in a public school, because clearly that's against the law, or whatever law they want to go by. That causes me to get fired if I try that. Obviously, since I'm teaching in a Christian school, I'm very blessed to be able to do that. But even in a secular system, it's been proven repeatedly in history, in America even, and also just in my personal life experience, that when a non-Christian tries to live generally by Christian principles, even without trying to, quote, be a Christian, life's just better. It just simply is better. You can improve your general character really no matter who you are or what you believe, to an extent, obviously. To an extent, you can improve it, if you're not a Christian. Now, that's another conversation for another time, so I'll save that maybe for another episode or something, I don't know. But anyway, that's my goal. My goal is to teach my students to improve themselves as human beings and live by right principles. And I'm going to do that before I teach them about English, because a person who improves their character, by definition, improves their education. Pretty simple. So maybe I should have just started with that. But that's actually all a lead-in to what I want to say now. I want to back all this up with my own personal experience and what I witnessed and why this is so important to me. In the fall of 2013, I believe that's when it was, but I was assigned as part of my course, like a service learning course. I was assigned to tutor a 7th grade boy at a local urban middle school in West Dayton. And for its own sake, this school will remain nameless. And of course, it figures it would be math, because, I've always hated that, because I'm great at, I'm studying to be an English teacher. And of course, they're like, well, you should tutor in math. Oh, that makes sense. Good. But this kid was nice. And I'm going to say his name, but it's been changed for privacy. I'm going to call him Jacob. And so I was tutoring him. And he was a good kid. He struggled, especially with his environment. But he was a smart kid, and he needed the help, and I was happy to be able to give him what help I could while, wrestling with the whole crap load that is Common Core and all that good stuff. But while I was there, I stumbled upon one of the most disturbing abuses of teacher authority that I think I have yet to see so far in my short teacher career. On October 11th, this is 2013, we were reduced to 1 hour and 15 minutes, because I was supposed to tutor him for a specific, 2-hour period, but we lost 45 minutes of it, even though I stayed for an extra half hour that day, because some of it Jacob spent at lunch while I tried to figure out how to teach him the math that I had to teach him that day, but also probably because one of the teachers in a nearby classroom wouldn't let him leave until he had said what he was going to say. I kept a very detailed journal of my service learning experience for that class, and so most of what follows is literally paraphrased from what I wrote. So at first I paid little attention to the circumstances, but when Jacob and some of the other boys in his grade went into the classroom, the teacher right away, proceeded to yell at them in the most aggressive and disrespectful way that I have ever heard anyone use on a child. I'm not even exaggerating. He was raving like a lunatic about how they were disrespecting him in his classroom, talking over him while he was talking, how they thought they were so tough, all stuff like that typical rebellious students will do when they want to be anywhere else other than class. Of course, no wonder they want to be somewhere else if you're behaving like this. Of course, this was not the first time I had heard this teacher yell before, which, should not be surprising. If he's going to do this in front of everybody, he's going to be comfortable with it because he's done it before. And of course, he used profanity, and so I'll repeat that profanity here just because I'm repeating what he said. I heard him scream, "Shut up," to the students. He screamed, "Sit your ass down," constantly, multiple times before. But that Friday, that took the cake. There was so much yelling and screaming from him that I actually, I stood up and I went to go, peek into the classroom. What I saw was one of the kids with his hood pulled tightly over his head, his face on the desk. This teacher was standing over him. He was leaning down to try to get beneath the hood, screaming at him like a cop, to a criminal who's resisting arrest. He was arguing with them. He was yelling, "I can talk if I want to. It's my classroom." And one of the kids apparently laughed or something, which, maybe it was a defense mechanism, or maybe he just found it hard to take this guy seriously. But the teacher, when he laughed, the teacher looked at me and went, "You can laugh, bitch. You can laugh if you want." And then he continued to his rant. He was like, "Y'all are pissing me off." That's what he was saying. That's how he was behaving. So now apparently one of them at some point stood up and tried to argue with him. And the teacher went over to him and he said, "You think you're tough? You want to prove it? I will punch you down." Now, at this point, I was listening really closely, because if he actually tried to do that, I was going to intervene. I was going to step in. I didn't care I knew I was a tutor there. I knew I was not any sort of authority figure in the school, but there's no way that deserves to go on in any classroom anywhere at all. Unless the students are actively like assaulting their teacher, and they were not doing anything of the sort. Now, thankfully, he didn't do that. And Jacob was released about 15 minutes later with the rest of those students. Now, this teacher, who for his own sake will remain unnamed in this episode, was completely out of line. I really hope that's obvious to anyone who has common sense, which apparently is in short supply at that school, since many of the teachers there approved of and imitated his tactics. Now, in his defense, okay, I gotta be fair and all that. In his defense, I will say he has the right to demand respect from his students. He's the teacher. It is his classroom. He expects them to abide by his rules, and when they fail to do so, they should be dealt with appropriately. That's common decency in all classrooms. But I would like to emphasize the word appropriately. Some of the things he said were probably legitimate and true, and of course, at that school, kids act the way they act, and they need to be put in line. But that man completely delegitimized what he said by how he conducted himself. I sit there and I wonder, is it any wonder as to why these kids are the way they are? Why are people incredibly confused as to what's happened to our urban communities? These are their role models. So how else do we expect them to turn out when they get older? Because most of them probably experience similar things at home. That teacher, whatever his subject, is not actually teaching his subject. I don't care if he has the best lesson plans, has the best grasp on the material, has the best presentation of it in class. He destroys all of it with behavior like that. He does not deserve to be a teacher. I make a better math tutor for 2 hours on Friday than he makes as a full-time teacher in his chosen subject. The teacher who berated his students and disrespected them to that degree shouldn't expect them to turn out any other way. No teacher who treats their students like that should expect them to turn out any better than themselves. Those students didn't learn to respect authority from him. They learned that when someone's angry with you and has power over you, they can yell and scream to get their way like a child. He didn't provide appropriate punishment or reinforcement, and he certainly didn't display anything close to something approaching self-control or self-regulation. I'd also argue, this is getting back to my college roots, he's not only failing to build a proper sense of self-efficacy in his students, he probably has self-efficacy issues of his own. He feels this need to assert his dominance over them that way because he doesn't believe in his own authority or ability to control his classroom. I wonder why. And before it sounds like I'm making excuses for his behavior, I just want to say there's no excuse for behavior this way for anyone, but especially for a teacher. And I can tell you right now, if that had been my kid, like my child had been in there, that teacher and I would have gone out back for some words. And that's all they would have been. Words. Because unlike that man, I possess self-control. All of these things he demonstrated now have rubbed off on his students. At least if their atrocious behavior for the few hours that I was able to witness them is any indication. And now he's the most obvious sign of detrimental influence of a teacher that I've witnessed while at that school. But I should also mention that the disciplinary tactics of the other staff that I observed at that school during fall semester didn't really vary that much from that. It was very similar in method and in attitude to what I saw that day. Therefore, like I said, it's no surprise that these children are utterly unprepared for academic life and really life in general, because their role models are unprepared for life in general. Out of all the reasons why I became a teacher, this is one of my top 5, easily, maybe top 3. Kids like Jacob deserve better. All the students do. They deserve teachers, public, private, charter, whatever. They deserve teachers who will model proper character for them. It's one of the reasons I've really grown to accept the fact that I indoctrinate kids. I do. Really, all teachers do. Because the root word of indoctrinate is doctrine. To indoctrinate someone is to teach them doctrine, which is defined as a set of beliefs or guiding principles. So am I indoctrinating my students? Yes, of course I am. Every teacher in the world indoctrinates. Every parent, every person who is in a leadership position indoctrinates. As a teacher, then, you have a choice. indoctrinate intentionally and mold students into the people you want them to be, or do it passively and have no say in the outcome. Parents do this too, assuming that they're good ones, and the best ones will indoctrinate their children with real values, and real values and morals can only come from someone who is imitating Christ. Needless to say, the aforementioned teacher failed spectacularly. I am not going to be that teacher. I am going to be different, for the sake of my students and for the sake of future generations. And that's all there is to it. And that's why Ethan's excited today. Thanks for listening. See you next time.